Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Administrator Reagan, glad to see you here. If I understand your resume correct, your father was an extension agent for somewhere around 30 years?
Yes. Well,
right.
he was an extension agent around 14, and then the National Guard pulled him back into active duty. So.
Oh, well, that was that might be even better. That means if you were wrong, you got corrected.
Absolutely.
Educated both ways. That's awesome. Well, I have a tremendous amount of respect for our land grant institutions and our extension agents, and I appreciate your comments about following the science, because agriculture needs to follow the science. The farmers want to follow the science. I am concerned that when it gets to the courts, that the science sometimes gets ignored, and decisions that should be made by Congress, by the agencies, when they're determined in the courts, they end up being done in many cases without regard for the impact on production agriculture. And as you know, I'm from Georgia, you're from North Carolina, so many of our crops are going to be the same. The chemicals we use are the same. You know, it's been mentioned before, herbicides, glyphosate, dicamba, atrazine. I mean, when we're going to use no-till or minimal till, things that are actually very good for the environment, we have to have those chemicals, or we can't use those growing practices. And you know, when those things are taken off of the market, it means that we have to burn a whole lot more diesel at a much higher cost to the farmer and candidly the environment. Yeah. And I just wonder if you could talk more about the importance of using herbicides and the fact that we need to be looking at all of the facts. When you take these herbicides off the market and you have to transit the field multiple times because you can't use the herbicide, so you're burning more diesel. You have to cut the dirt deeper with a bottom plow instead of using no-till. The damage that's being done to the environment simply by the courts not taking into account the impact on production agriculture and good environmental practices when they take these chemicals off the market.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, and I couldn't agree with you more. And we find ourselves slightly in a conundrum, which I would consider not necessarily a technicality, but because of a lack of incorporating the ESA into our decision-making, now we're all in this pressure cooker. I believe that our farmers should have every tool in the toolbox. And so there's a couple things we can do. I think the first thing is making sure that we are looking at the science and making sure that the science is correct. I also think that when we have situations like dicamba, it's not about just ripping it off the market. It's about making sure that our farmers have the education so that we can avoid the overspray and having millions of dollars of crops disrupted because some farmers need that pesticide. But then there is this sort of lack of funding at EPA. We have so many new market entrants that are ready to hit the streets that could be tools for our farmers, but we haven't gotten them through our review process because we have too few employees to do so. So yes, I think we can make sure we're applying the science correctly, don't artificially take products off the shelves, but then there are a lot of new products that farmers are ready to see and use that we need to get those out the door as well.
But in many cases, it's a court that's issuing the ruling that defies logic. I mean, this isn't an EPA issue, but I mean, if baby powder caused cancer, we'd all have cancer, right? I mean, and yet we've got courts issuing rulings on that are taking products that we've all used. Glyphosate is an example of one. I've used Roundup multiple times. If it caused cancer, I feel sure that I would have cancer, and I don't. So I'm very worried about the courts not taking into account the science and the impact on production agriculture. And that's one of the things as we write the Farm Bill that maybe we can give some direction to the court on. That said, while I've got you, before I go, I do want to mention one thing. It bothers me to see our forest lands being cut down and solar panels put up on it. I don't understand how that's a square deal for the environment or the taxpayer. And I can tell you in my area of the state, we have the solar subsidies are so high that they're paying 30 to 40% more than land is worth to anybody else. And then they're cutting down the forest and putting solar panels up on it. I do think that's something that if we're going to be honest about what's good for the environment, we have to be honest about what's good for wildlife and the watershed and everything as well, not just carbon. And that's something that if any help from your administration with making sure that those subsidies aren't so high and aren't able to be used to cut down forest land, I would appreciate it. My time's expired.